On January 27, 1959, 9 students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, UPI, led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, set out from Ivdel for a winter ski trek into the northern Ural Mountains toward Otorten. Their planned route aimed for the remote slopes of Kholat Syakhl in Sverdlovsk Oblast. The group included experienced skiers and radio operator trainees who had practiced map reading, winter survival, and pitching canvas tents. They carried wooden ski poles, crampons, fur-lined boots, sleeping bags, petrol stoves, food, and a single compass. Their objective was a bold winter crossing, a route that would count as a challenging expedition for UPI students. And at stake were reputations, scientific curiosity, and a raw test of survival against Arctic weather. Kholat Syakhl, a treeless, windswept mountain whose name means dead mountain in the Mansi language, rises with jagged ridges and sudden blizzards that can drop temperatures to -40 degrees Celsius and whip snow into suffocating whiteouts. In such remote terrain, help would be days away. Radios were unreliable, and a small mistake could become a brutal, freezing emergency. The group left confident and aware of the risks, but unprepared for the sequence of terrifying discoveries that followed. When the 9 hikers did not return as scheduled, worried relatives and friends in Ivdel and at the Ural Polytechnic Institute raised the alarm. Rescue teams and volunteers launched a formal search that grew more intense through February 1959. On February 26, 1959, searchers reached the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl and found the Dyatlov group's orange canvas tent collapsed in the snow. It was a jagged, bloodless scene, as if panic had torn the shelter apart. The tent had been cut from the inside. The zipper or canvas was hacked open, and a large slit served as an exit into the void. Inside, boots, fur-lined coats, food, and personal effects lay abandoned as if their owners had fled an immediate, invisible threat. No bodies were in the tent, only scarves, mittens, and a petrol stove left cold. The stove stilled like a stopped heart. Subscribe. Maybe it would have saved them. Outside, a single line of footprints led away from the tent into the wasteland. Some prints were made by heavy boots. Others showed thin impressions of socks or bare feet pressing into the crusted snow, evidence that at least some members had left without shoes in sub-zero temperatures. The trail headed toward a dark stand of pines and vanished over a small rise, a trailing line of prints that turned this overdue expedition into a macabre mystery. There were no clear signs of a firefight, no overturned gear that would explain a conventional struggle. Instead, the scene suggested a sudden, desperate flight. The discovery on February 26 turned a missing person case into an urgent, grim investigation, and rescuers steeled themselves to follow those footprints into a freezing, unknown danger. Searchers did not find 9 bodies in a single place. The recoveries unfolded in grisly stages across different sites and elevations, turning the area into a fractured map of death. The orange canvas tent was found on February 26, 1959. Over the following days and weeks, investigators recovered bodies at separate locations. First 2 near a stand of furs at the tree line within walking distance of the tent. 3 at intermediate positions between the tent and the woods. And finally, after the snow melted on May 4, 1959, 4 corpses exhumed from a shallow ravine well below the slope. Forensic pathologists in Sverdlovsk concluded that at least some victims died of hypothermia, their faces frozen, hands clenched, and clothing arranged in ways consistent with paradoxical undressing, a behavior seen in severe hypothermia. Other victims bore savage internal injuries, fractured skulls, crushed ribs, and sternums. Autopsies described this damage as consistent with extremely high force despite minimal external laceration. Technicians also recorded anomalous traces on several garments. Geiger counters flagged low-level radioactive contamination on some clothing and equipment, adding an eerie layer to the mystery. The Soviet inquiry that followed was bureaucratic and secretive. Local authorities logged the recoveries, and the Sverdlovsk prosecutor ultimately closed the case in 1959, citing an unspecified, compelling natural force. Many files, autopsy notes, and photographic negatives were classified or went missing. That patchwork of autopsy conclusions, scattered locations, contradictory causes of death, and hinted at contamination created a muddled evidentiary picture, leaving glaring, unanswered questions and a mounting dread that propels the story to its next escalation. Investigators began with the scattered corpses, the hacked canvas, the barefooted tracks, and the frozen stove, trying to reassemble the last hours with cold, clinical precision. In 1959, Soviet teams photographed the torn tent, cataloged footprints, and recorded autopsy notes. Decades later, independent forensic pathologists, avalanche engineers, and acoustics researchers re-examined those same prints, garments, and X-rays. They compared the tent slashes to documented escape behavior, mapped the footpaths toward the tree line, and reconstructed the site's microclimate using meteorological records from January through February 1959. Clothing choices: heavy fur coats left in the tent, some victims found partly undressed, were weighed against paradoxical undressing patterns seen in hypothermia. Autopsy reports showing crushed ribs and fractured skulls were compared with blunt force trauma models. Avalanche experts ran slab release simulations on Kholat Syakhl's eastern slope and showed how a small, wind-loaded slab could shear off and pin people while leaving little surface trauma. Katabatic wind models described sudden, terrifying gusts that could shred a tent and drive a panicked escape. Acoustic teams tested the infrasound idea by recreating wind-over-slope conditions that produce low-frequency hums capable of inducing nausea and irrational fear. Declassified Sverdlovsk files, partial autopsy notes, and radiology logs were cross-checked. Geiger readings recorded in 1959 and cited in later reviews showed low-level contamination on some clothing, a detail researchers incorporated without treating it as proof of cause. By 2020, the Russian Investigative Committee offered an avalanche-based reconstruction that accounts for the torn tent, the socked footprints, and hypothermia deaths. Still, the severe internal injuries and the scattering of bodies kept putting every theory to the test, driving the inquiry to its final, terrible reckoning. Everything collides at a single, cold apex. A torn orange tent, socked footprints, a stilled stove, frozen faces, crushed ribs, fractured skulls, and Geiger clicks on clothing. Three explanations vie for dominance: the avalanche thesis, slab release, katabatic gusts, and infrasound. Accounts for the hacked tent, barefoot flight, and deaths from hypothermia, and it was endorsed in a 2020 Russian review. However, avalanche models do not explain the savage internal crushing with minimal external wounds recorded in the 1,959 autopsies, nor why bodies were found at different elevations and were recovered on two distinct dates, February 26 and May 4th. Panic and human error explain paradoxical undressing, abandoned boots, and a frantic rush toward the tree line, but panic alone struggles to account for the pattern of internal trauma. The third strand, military or secret activity, arose because some garments registered low-level radioactivity and several files, negatives, and notes disappeared into Sverdlovsk archives. That suspicion explains secrecy and the lingering Geiger readings, but lacks conclusive proof tying tests or weapons to the broken chests and skulls. No single theory reconciles the contradictions. The central horror remains unresolved and keeps dragging families and investigators back to Kholat Syakhl. After the deadly night on Kholat Syakhl, the Dyatlov Pass incident grew into a gruesome cultural obsession. Avalanche theories, infrasound, secret military tests, and even UFO explanations spread across books, documentaries, and internet forums, each attempt trying to stitch order onto a jagged, bloody puzzle. Relatives of Igor Dyatlov and the other victims pushed Soviet and later Russian authorities for answers. That pressure prompted investigative reopenings that culminated in a 2020 finding by the Russian Investigative Committee that an avalanche was the most likely cause. The case's repeated reopenings, classified files, and missing negatives deepened distrust and left families haunted by unanswered forensic ambiguities. The tragedy exposed the limits of reconstruction. X-rays and autopsy notes can only go so far when winter, secrecy, and time have shredded evidence, and the gap between fact and fear remains the bleakest, most enduring wound.